Hello friends, welcome to Home Sense with Nell. If it's your first time visiting, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you decided to check out my channel. And if you're a returning visitor, thank you so much for stopping by today. I know there are so many choices for you to watch on YouTube, and I really do appreciate you coming to visit Home Sense with Nell. So guys, as you can see, my garden is done. This Southern California heat wave that we've been having is like non-stop. So my plants are tired, they're finished. I'm getting ready to take everything out and refresh my beds for fall. So I'm so excited to get my fall planting going. But first I have to go ahead and remove some of these old and tired vegetables. So I'm starting with the yellow pear tomato, which I talked about in my last video. I really wasn't too impressed with this plant. The fruit does look really pretty, and it brightens up a salad, but the flavor just wasn't there for me, guys. So I don't think I'll be planting that again. But anyway, I went ahead and took that out, and my next job was to remove my rosemary, because I've been saying for quite a while that I wanted to get it out of this bed, knowing that it was kind of restricted on space here. And it also had been attacked by what I think was spider mites. And you can see the damage that the spider mites did to this plant. But what I did was I went ahead and transplanted it to another part of the garden, and I cut off all the old growth, and I think it's going to make a good recovery. So we'll be having rosemary, hopefully with our Thanksgiving dinner. So next, guys, I have to show you this remarkable root from this Swiss chard. So my family and I, we love chard, and we kept the chard in for quite a long time. And I guess it was a little bit too long because this root system is extensive. You're going to see in just a minute when I pull this thing out. I could barely get it out. I almost had to use two hands to get this thing out. Man, will you look at that? This was incredible. Definitely not what I was expecting to be, under the soil surface for my chard plant. This was just, it blew my mind, guys. Look how big this thing is. But you know what? Pulling this out, I did learn something, and that is in the future when I use my fish fertilizer or any type of liquid fertilizer, I'm definitely going to, water it in well around the entire area of the bed and not just directly under the plant, because that way the roots will have a much better chance of absorbing it. And that second root was from my second chard plant. So I had heard over the years that it's a good idea to leave your root balls in the soil and just basically cut the leafy greens or whatever vegetable you're harvesting, cut that off, but leave the roots in the soil. So I wasn't able to do that because this was so large. So instead I just cut some pieces and let them fall back into the soil. Hopefully they'll decompose and add some nutrition. And here you just see me getting some remaining roots from some other vegetables that we had in the spring garden. I think this one was lettuce. It might have been oak leaf lettuce. And again, I'm just doing my best to try to remove some of that root ball and drop it back down into the soil. So hopefully it can add nutrition to the soil. But the real woody part I removed. Okay, so once I got all the vegetables out that I wanted to remove except for my prized collard you see over there on the left, I went ahead and grabbed an empty 5-gallon bucket so that I could use it to collect the mulch. Now what I use for mulch is some dried leaves from one of my neighbor's trees. I'm not sure what kind of tree it is, but the leaves are so small that it almost looks like shredded leaves, and I think it makes a really good free mulch. So I've been using that for a couple of seasons, and I really like that. But I had to go ahead and get as much as I could off the surface of the soil so I could begin to prep the beds. Now, friends, if you know me, I do enjoy shopping, but I have challenged myself for the fall season to not buy transplants from the garden center. Instead, I will be starting everything from seed in my solo cups and my little seed starting packs. And so I had to go ahead and get rid of those tags from my garden bed. All right, so I'm almost done removing the mulch as much as I could anyway. There's still a fine layer of the leaves left on the surface, but I think I got enough of them out. So the only plant left in this bed was the collard. Because collard being a cool weather vegetable, I'm thinking that it'll be fine to just let it stay in the bed through the fall and winter season. All I did was just trim off some of the yellower leaves and some of the more insect bitten leaves that I didn't want to touch, and just left it in the bed. Okay, guys, so surprisingly, we have lost quite a bit of soil, and or the soil has gotten compacted over the last two growing seasons. So when I stuck my hand down to the bottom of the bed, this was as deep as the soil went. So I would say maybe 4 inches or so. So it's definitely time for a refresh. And because I'm doing everything on a budget, I was thinking of the best way to refresh this bed and refill this bed without spending a lot of money. So what I decided to do was to go ahead and reuse my potting soil from my spring gardens. And the majority of that potting soil is actually in my 5-gallon buckets that you can see behind me on the left on the little, what would you call that? Terrace of the hillside. So this potting mix is still perfectly good. I purchased it at Home Depot, but it did need to be refreshed a little bit as far as nutrient wise and organic matter wise. So here you're just going to see me dumping out a lot of this soil. And if you remember, if most plants' root system only goes down about 6 to 8 inches, so I don't put soil all the way to the bottom. And in order to save on soil, I fill non-toxic filler items in the bottom of any type of deep vase or container. So you see the cans, aluminum cans, and water bottles in a lot of my big containers just as a filler. So again, I'm just removing some of the mulch. And adding this used potting soil to my existing raised garden bed. And I'm surprised, whatever was planted in this particular 5-gallon bucket had a pretty extensive root system. Unfortunately, I don't remember if this was the watermelon or squash or tomatoes, but these roots do go down pretty far. Now I'm taking a little bit of care to get these cans and bottles out because I could reuse them for my next large container garden. So I'm going to just get as much soil off as I can and put those back into the bucket for later use. Now looking at that, that looks like some native soil that I put in the bottom of this container. So this container had a combination of native soil in the bottom and then potting mix on the top. And there's nothing wrong with the native soil. I just don't want to put too much of it into my bed because I want to have the good loamy soil. That's what I'm going for, is that good loamy soil that holds moisture, um, that doesn't drain too fast and doesn't cause water to pool. Doesn't look pretty, but it does work. All in all, guys, I think I put about, I don't know, 7 or 8 buckets worth of soil, hello, into this bin to refresh it and get it up to a soil level that I was happy with. So it's just basically following the same process, removing the mulch, dumping out the soil, removing any of the fillers at the bottom, and then spreading it all out. Finally, I don't know why that one was fighting with me. Probably because it has that big old Hawaiian punch bottle at the bottom, and it was stuck in there. Or maybe that was apple juice. All right, now, so I'm really happy with all of these earthworms and all this uh, activity until I saw that thing. Oh my gosh, do you see that white thing squirming in the dirt? Those things gross me out so much, guys. Those are grubs, and they're basically the larvae of moths. And I know moths, and butterflies are, you know, very important in the garden and in the ecosystem, but I cannot stand to see grubs. So anytime I see one, I get rid of it. If I had chickens, I would probably feed it to the chickens, but unfortunately I don't. So the kindest thing I can do is just remove it from my garden bed and put it somewhere else. Okay, guys, so after that was done, again, I dumped out quite a few of the 5-gallon buckets, and now the vegetable bed has a soil level that I'm pretty happy with, but I'm not quite ready to plant in it. I have to add a few amendments first. So one of the things I like about gardening is that it's a continual learning experience. And I noticed that the garden bed that I'm currently working in always had the best growth. The plants looked the healthiest and the largest. And I thought, why would that be? And I thought back to when we first started the garden bed up, and I realized that the soil that was in there was a combination of peat, moss, compost, and vermiculite because it is the soil mixture that's recommended by one of the gardening books that I follow called the Square Foot Gardening Method. So I decided to go ahead and try to refill this garden bed with that same mixture, but do it as budget or economically as I could. So what I did was I went ahead and got some of my peat moss that I keep on the side of the house. It's a huge 3 cubic foot package, and I think it costs about $11, and it's lasted me well over a year. So I went ahead and got some of that, and I wet it really well with water because peat moss is great for retaining moisture in your beds. As you can see, it's very, very porous. It absorbs water so well that I had to literally fill this bucket up twice in order to get the volume of water into those little peat moss fibers until I was satisfied. So this is what it looks like when it's completely saturated. It can't, absorb any more water, and that's what you're going for. And then I saw this cute little guy in the garden, so I wanted to share him with you guys. But look, he wants to fight me, so I left him alone. So anyway, here you see me adding the peat moss to my existing bed. And ideally, again, as I said, when I first started up the bed, we used about 1/3 peat moss. Here, I didn't want to add quite that much because there was existing peat moss in the soil and I didn't want it to get too compact. But I just added what I felt was a good amount for the time. So here, as you can see, I'm just watering in the bed. Because the soil was so dry from all the heat that we've had lately, I had to water it for quite a while until I actually could see that most of the soil was moist. So this time, as I said, I'm working on a budget. I didn't want to go and buy any bags of compost. So I went ahead and used some of my own homemade compost that we make from food scraps. I don't have too much in here because I use it in different ways throughout the garden, but I was able to get a few good scoops out, and so I added those to my garden bed as well. And as you can see, there's a lot of earthworms in there and even a few little sprouts in there. So to me, that's an indication that the compost is really good quality and it's high in nutrients. So it should be a really good addition to the bed. Excuse the mess, guys. The garden is always a work in progress. In fact, on this day, both my husband and I were outside working on the backyard. He's up on the hill cutting down some brush, and I'm over here working on my garden beds. And there's a sneak peek of a larger garden bed that my husband and I built, which is a 4x6. And I'm really excited to get that in place. But I have a project that I'm going to work on first before I fill that one up. And so I'll keep you posted with an updated video on that. So this soil is looking pretty good. I just go ahead and turn it over so I can mix in the compost with the existing soil and the peat moss to get everything nice and homogeneous. And at this point, guys, I realized that this would have been a much easier job if I had a wheelbarrow or a tarp, but I didn't have one at my disposal, so this was working just fine to go ahead and mix it up in the bed itself. Now, this is a very important addition, at least in my opinion. I know I've added the compost, but just to ensure that there is enough nutrition in the soil for my vegetables, I wanted to go ahead and add some organic granular fertilizer. So this fertilizer, Dr. Earth's, is pretty good. It's available on Amazon and any of your big box stores. But it has all the basic, the macronutrients like the NPK, and then it has the micronutrients that your plants need, as well as some beneficial bacteria and fungi. So my bed being about 6 feet by 3 feet or so, the package suggested that I put in about 2 cups. So that's what I was doing right here. And it does kick up a lot of dust. I always say if you're working with anything granular, if you're sensitive like me, if you have a lot of allergies, just go ahead and put on a mask, whether or even a bandana, just something to cover your nose and mouth so that you don't start sneezing, because that's what happens to me when I'm out in the garden sometimes. So at this point, guys, I was almost done with my refresh. Everything's looking pretty good. The dirt, or the soil, excuse me, is nice and brown and moistened. But there's one more thing I had to do. So I protected my bed overnight by covering it with a sheet because I didn't want any nasty grubs or anything unusual getting into my soil. So I pulled back that sheet and I went ahead and added one more amendment, which would be the vermiculite. Now, the vermiculite is a naturally occurring substance that helps to aerate your soil. It's those little white specks that you see when you buy potting soil from a nursery. So I've had really good results with vermiculite in the past because it does give your soil a certain texture that allows it to be, I'm going to say, friable for your plant's roots so they can easily navigate through the soil. So I'm going to go ahead and add about 3 bags of vermiculite to this bed because, again, this bed is about 6 by 3 or so. And vermiculite is very dusty. Just a warning. I wanted to show you guys this package because it's damaged, as you can see. I purchased these at Lowe's, and I don't know if you guys know it, but if there's any damaged packaging of any other products, they will automatically offer you a discount. So I specifically picked this up off the shelf because I saw it, and I saw that the volume of vermiculite was the same as the other bags, but I got it for a reduced cost. So I wet down the vermiculite just to help cut down on the dust a little bit and help it to blend into the soil a little bit better. And finally, I went ahead and used my hands to mix that in. I tried using the trowel, but that just wasn't working because the vermiculite is so bulky. But it does add, again, a nice element to the soil by allowing it to be a little bit more fluffy. And that way your plant's roots have an easier time spreading out and just making their way across the bed to absorb more nutrients. So guys, thanks so much for sticking along with me for this garden bed refresh for the fall 2020 season. I really appreciate you stopping by Home Sense with Nell, where I talk about home decor, DIYs, gardening, all on a budget. If that's your thing, please like, share, and subscribe. Talk to you soon.